Can everybody hear me? Yeah. So what I wanted to do, oh, okay, perfect. So what I wanted to do was sort of simply just attend a Refresh Colombo meeting, but our local convinced me to do a little bit of a talk. So this was a rushed presentation that I put together. What I wanted to really come out here and sort of talk about is my experiences over the last 10 odd years in working with startups, working with new ventures, and sort of starting off having absolutely no idea what I was doing, and then sort of learning along the way. The really important thing that I think the Sri Lankan entrepreneur community can learn from is that there is a certain amount of almost like muscle memory that has to get ingrained in a community, so that over a period of time you make less and less mistakes. And the way that you do that is through over several generations of entrepreneurships and multi-generational ventures. You sort of build up that know-how of what not to do and what to do in particular scenarios. So I just wanted to run you through 6 key points that I've learned over the last few years, and hopefully you can take something away from this particular presentation. Yes. So I am actually, at the moment, the CTO of Addictive Mobility. What we do is we are a mobile social advertising network. We primarily operate in the North American market, and at the moment we sort of dominate that. We hold obviously less than 5% of market share in all of mobile advertising, but it is growing very rapidly. We just wrapped up 2011 with more than 260% growth on 2010, so that was pretty impressive. And we are well on our way to sort of entering into the US market. And in context, that puts us in about, very small numbers, but puts us in about 3 million in on a $97 million industry, but it's growing very, very rapidly. At Addictive Mobility, we essentially deliver those ads that you see within mobile applications. Every single mobile advertisement that you would see here would be delivered in a blind fashion, so it wouldn't have any context as to who the user is, what they're up to. We bring in a social context so that we understand exactly what the end audience wants, what they've been talking about. We would even be bringing in things like what they just spoke on Twitter, what they just posted on a different application, even things like just, if it's a flight application, what those travel destinations were, and in bringing that in context to an advertisement that we would deliver. So let me sort of get started in sort of my journey in 3 different companies that I would have worked on. The first one would be an electronic commerce venture, which I consider very close to my heart. This was way back in 2001. And at that period of time, Sri Lanka really didn't have electronic commerce as a whole. What you found was you had an e-commerce industry that was flying high globally. You had Amazon.com, who had established itself over the last 5 to 6 years, and they were doing very well. You had this massive rivalry going on between Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and a whole bunch of new e-commerce ventures. And that competitive environment was unfortunately missing locally. All of the local e-commerce ventures were more or less malls that really became storefronts to existing brick and mortar stores, and that wasn't really e-commerce to begin with, because you don't get that value add of having no overhead on operation and the higher return on inventory. So I wanted to change that. The key opportunity that I saw was that there was no market fragmentation by product types that you would see now. You'd have one company doing ticketing, you'd have another company specializing in a particular line of products. That wasn't there, and that allowed me the opportunity of figuring out a department store venture online, where I was a retailer, not sort of the representative. I would work with the suppliers and become an actual e-tailer locally. There were some key challenges. The key of them all was that there was no local internet payment gateways. This is a huge problem, is that if you want to be a true e-tailer, you have to be able to operate across the wide spectrum of sort of pricing. So you want to be able to operate from 100 rupees all the way up to maybe 10,000 rupees. Now, in order to operate at the 100 rupee mark, where you'd have high number of transactions, you really can't do anything with the existing guys, because they would have sort of maybe a $3.60, $3.20 transaction cost that really kills the game entirely. So if you use a global internet payment gateway at this point in time, then you might as well not do it at all, because you wouldn't be competitive. You'd be more expensive than everybody else on the sort of the brick and mortar space, and then you don't bring any value addition into the marketplace. The second point was there was no, really this is surprising, but there were no courier services that could effectively deliver a product from point A to B locally. And that was a key problem. That was problem number 2. That had to be solved. And third point, obviously, was I was 15 years old. So I had to figure out all of these as a 15-year-old walking into rooms. The first lesson I think I learned was you have to break the status quo. If you're entering a particular industry or ecosystem, there's a reason why what you're attempting to do has not been done before. It's simply because the environment that you're operating in or you're stepping into does not facilitate that. There's something wrong in the environment that it doesn't allow anybody else to do that. So the only way that you can be a true entrepreneur is go into that ecosystem and change it. You've got to disrupt it. So the key point is go into an industry. If you want to do anything, it doesn't really matter what it is. Disrupt it, change it. If you can change how something is done, do it. Now you've just created yourself a new opportunity. And that's exactly what we did. We went in and looked at, well, we used some of these guys as well. We used WorldPay, we used PayPal. All of them were too expensive. We really couldn't penetrate the market with any of their services. So we went to a local. They didn't really have any sort of infrastructure to begin with. So I had to sign a MOU with the managing director of Sampath Bank. Interesting conversation when you're a 15-year-old. And actually get everything started. Now, that's a huge challenge because from the internet payment gateway side, us have to place something in the order of $2.4 million. So you got to convince a bank, hey, leave out $2.4 million because I see some value in having electronic commerce locally. It worked. They actually saw the value, and I think for that they're actually a better sort of environment for electronic commerce right now. But it's a very uphill task, and that's where you've got to change the game. And banks are the worst kind of sort of institutions where you have to go in and change something because they're designed to not change, not adapt, stick to what works, and that's it. So in any sort of venture that you're in, make sure you find something that's wrong with it and change it. The second one is don't hesitate to backtrack. What ended up happening was Sri Lanka wasn't really ready for electronic commerce. I was a little bit ahead of my time, maybe a lot. The problem there would have been there was high penetration of credit card usage, which is great. That's very deceptive, though, because there was no mail order culture before that. Without a mail order culture, people are very hesitant to give away a credit card and expect actually something to get delivered. So we worked extremely hard to convince people that, hey, give us your credit card information, and you will get something that day or maybe the morning after. But there's still too much hesitancy. And that's changed quite a bit now, and that's great to see. So as a startup, here was great sort of start, and then I'm stuck because the market's not ready. That happens to almost every single startup, and I think that's sort of the life cycle of any startup. So now you've got to backtrack. Don't hesitate to backtrack, because I don't think there's any sort of startup that starts off saying, I'm going to do that, and they actually go on to do that. That never happens. The second most important lesson is learn to pivot. You've got to pivot very, very consistently. All of the startups that I have been involved in right now, they pivot very aggressively and very fluidly. Part of that is you've got to hire people who can adapt their skill sets very quickly. You've got to be able to do you've got to be able to do things that may not have been in your sort of core competencies 6 months before, but you are now experts in that particular field, and that's very vital in the startup phase. So yeah, so if you're looking for your El Dorado, you're not going to find it in sort of your first, more like find it in your 50th try. So that brings me to my story of saying e-commerce isn't working, so I was going to pivot it into online publishing. Interesting different twist. So online publishing gets started in 2003, 2004, and it's a completely different industry, and we've got to learn everything from scratch. Something that I forgot to mention is that you guys would have met Udendra, would have given a speech to you in December, and Udendra happened to be the unfortunate soul that entered my electronic commerce venture and was the first guy to join the company. So in the online publishing side, I basically had one company dominating this sector called the fan fiction market. Basically, people go and write online content, publisher-grade content, based on existing characters, existing storylines from TV shows, from books, and things like that. You'd underestimate it, but it's really sort of the precursor to what we considered as online communities, the blogosphere, all of that was actually fan fiction for a long time. And when there was only one company in the world called fanfiction.net, and they were very, very powerful. And the year that we got started, which is 2003, they were in the top 10 brands on the net, because people were spending hours and hours and hours on this site reading stories. And you're talking about 300-page stories, and people were just sort of reading them. The second thing was, they were trying to charge a base pricing model on sort of a set of generic feature sets. So we sat down and we said we could do this, and we could probably give it for free. So we decided, again, take a lesson from the first point, and we decided to disrupt it completely, maybe a little bit too much. So the key barriers was we had to reinvent the wheel, because it was a proprietary code base. So we had to sort of start it from scratch. And that you guys probably won't even face is internet connectivity. There was no ADSL, so we had to figure out how to manage, run, and deploy a site on dial-up, which is very expensive. So my was costing my payroll. So that is an interesting twist. And last point is we were based in Colombo, and that's a huge disadvantage. It doesn't really matter from the technology side. I think it doesn't matter where you are. If you're Silicon, you start off with a little bit of a disadvantage always, and it rapidly. Even based out of Toronto, the same disadvantages are there. Nobody wants to invest in a company that they cannot take a 1-hour flight to, and that's sort of the limiting barrier around it. So being in Colombo, we had to be extraordinarily amazing just to sort of get on the radar of some key players. So my next one is, next point is, we had missed the boat. Somebody had come in and done a fan fiction site and had done it quite well. And we didn't have the rights to call and say we were the pioneers in this space. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a prerequisite to success. Both of these companies, Facebook and Google, did reinvent. They entered the ecosystem that were already present, already dominated, and very successfully by other companies. And all of them, all sort of their rights to fame would be that they would last in those industries. There would never be another sort of a search engine of the Google caliber, because they were the last, and there would not be another Facebook type sort of identity management service either, and they were the last. So don't hesitate to enter an industry that's already dominated or populated, because you could be the last guy standing, and that's a very good thing. So we entered this ecosystem that was already dominated, and we managed to sort of carve out a niche from it, and that was very interesting play. And I think I encourage everybody to not get discouraged just because somebody else is playing in your sandbox. Just do it much more better. And then the last venture is mobile advertising. This has been the most interesting so far, and I think it has been a culmination of the last two. Online publishing taught me a lot about online communities and how to manage those communities, and that over the last 5 years, from that point onwards, had evolved into something called social. Electronic commerce had taught me how electronic transactions and sort of the thinking behind paid advertising functioned, and that had culminated into a mobile advertising market. So putting the two together seemed obvious, and that's exactly how everything panned out. So the fact that, to a certain degree, the last two ventures failed allowed me to succeed here, and that's very important. Everything that you do will not succeed, and each of your failures is a key point to a success later on. So don't get discouraged. And if you succeed in your first venture, I'll be quite sad for you, because you're probably missing out on something amazing later on. So the opportunity here was pretty obvious. Advertising in the US is a $670 billion industry. So that's a country more on advertising per year than maintaining 2 wars overseas, supposedly bankrupting them. So we feel, at least at Addictive, and I think a lot of other companies feel, that television, which dominates 70% of that figure, is dying and is going to get swallowed up over the next few years by mobile. And I don't think the online space is going to budge too much. And I think the boundaries of the advertising space would be a dominating mobile space with TV and online in the sidelines. So having the opportunity at making a grab at some of that 670 billion is too enticing. So there's no justification there. The definition of, to define the intersection between social and mobile is something that a lot of other companies are trying to do. And I think they're trying it from different angles. They're trying to do it from content. They're trying to do it from sort of experiences, or taking something from web and saying, oh, here, I've done it better, I've done it on mobile. We feel that the innovation and all of those things, the content, the innovation, the applications, and how people consume that will be defined by your ability to monetize it, right? So everybody does all of these things to make money. So unless you can figure out a way to attribute value to a mobile experience and to a social experience, then those industries will simply be fluff to a certain degree. And that's exactly what we were discussing before, is that Google controls that ecosystem because they control the flow of money. So having some measure of control over both social and mobile, and more importantly, how the two play together, will afford my company the ability to make some influential decisions in that space that's beneficial to us. So figuring out that definition was important. And the last point, again, from the past is, we are entering an ecosystem that inhibits a new startup from doing something new. So we had to change the game so that we could actually have a chance at winning. Entry barriers. We were actually going against Google from the very beginning. So it's a David versus Goliath scenario from the very beginning. They are trying to do something pretty amazing on mobile. They control a handset. They control the largest online ad network. They control a lot of the content. They control even properties on all the competing handsets. They control the ability to deploy the content because they own some of the content as well now. So going in there and trying to monetize that is a tough challenge, and you've got to have guts to do that because you're hedging a lot of your reputation on it. Then the second point is, if you're doing something interesting, there's going to be other companies that have a larger war chest. In our case, everybody that we compete with has $20 million or more, even if they're a small startup. So which meant we have to be extremely lean, because even right now we are a self-funded company, and we are much more flexible for that. Obviously, I don't know whether that'll last for too long because it's becoming very hard. But we have competed with companies with $20 million war chests, and in Google's case, about $40 billion. But you are going to go against people who have more money, But at the end of the day is how efficient are they versus you, and how focused are you. So don't get discouraged just because someone somewhere in Silicon Valley just got $100 million to do exactly what you're doing. Chances are they'll probably spend it just a little bit incorrectly, that you'll have the opportunity to sneak in past them. So don't get frightened by massive dollar values. That doesn't really do anything. And finally, geography. As I discussed, even in Toronto, it's a huge problem. So all of that, especially in David Goliath scenarios, you do have to find a good co-pilot. It's very unlikely that you're going to succeed in one of those highly tense environments on your own. That's a lot of stress. And you do have to find a good co-pilot. And it's quite important that they see the world very much different than you do. My co-pilot, per se, is my CEO, who sees the world very, very different to how I see sort of the mobile ecosystem. He comes from a completely different background to mine, and that helps quite a bit. The company has 2 or more perspectives in sort of guiding it in different directions. I'm right 50% of the time, and he's probably right 50% of the time. But that just means that we are less right, much less than we should be. Arguments are great, so find someone who you can spar with and walk away with a handshake, because that's very important. You shouldn't find somebody where you have your first fight and the whole thing falls apart. So maybe have a little bit of an argument before you decide to start your venture.